Um,
Hi, how y'all doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
Just really, all I think on behalf of all of us, we're so grateful that you took the time to be here with us. It means so much. Um, you know,
Oh, totally my pleasure. Happy to help in any way I can.
yeah. So, how this is our kind of our first official podcast and our first like official recording that we'll be posting. Um, so kind of, I have questions that I have written out, and I'm just going to ask them, and I think it's just to kind of get this conversation flowing,
Sounds
and
great.
how it goes. So I really want to focus on masculinity and responsibility. That's a really important topic, especially I think as me and Elizabeth have talked previously about things we wanted to talk to you about, and that one was pretty big. So a good question I have for you is what's behind the masculinity crisis we see today?
I think there's several things behind it. One of it has to do with something of a rejection of what we would call traditional masculinity, and you see that manifesting somewhat in elements of feminism. And you see it in just kind of what we would call woke culture or critical theory culture, where if you divide up the whole world into oppressor and oppressed, well, it turns out if you're a man, you're usually getting lumped into the oppressed column, or excuse me, the oppressor column, unless you have some sort of other intersectional thing you can appeal to in order to get out of it. And so some of it is looking at men and essentially saying that those characteristics that we often associate with masculinity, competitiveness, sometimes stoicism, aggression, capacity for violence, all of these things are the source of the world's ills. And since that's largely manifested in masculinity, therefore masculinity itself is toxic. And the way that we're going to, save society from masculine men is to feminize them. And again, some people will reject that, but then I look at the various accusations that they throw at masculine traits, and then I look at the solutions to them, and it's hard not to come to the conclusion that that's at least been an attempt. And so there's a lot of men that for a while they felt like there was something kind of inherently wrong with them. I think a lot of young boys and men that thought there was something inherently wrong with them. At the same time that that was going on, you also saw kind of an elevation of feminine attributes as being superior. And so, you saw things like, the future is female, or, the force is female when it came to like IPs like Star Wars and things like that. So there was this constant narrative within the culture as a whole that wasn't just attempting to elevate feminine attributes, which in and of itself I think would have been fine, but was also trying to diminish masculine characteristics and attributes at the same time. And so if you're a young boy seeing this, well, then you're growing up with some mixed signals, because the very instincts that I believe, God put into, men in general, are now supposedly wrong. There's something bad about them. And so it's going to cause people to feel bad about things that they naturally feel drawn toward. And then the question is, well, what do you do about it? Do you go along with it? Do you reject it? Do you try to adopt these other characteristics which seem to be elevated by society? And you generally end up getting one of kind of three camps, right? Three approaches to this. One approach is to say, okay, fine. If it's bad to be masculine, well, then I should be more feminine. And you end up with a certain kind of guy that behaves that way. You have other people that just outright reject it. And they say, okay, fine, I reject this characterization of masculinity. And so I'm going to listen to the guys that tell me to be as strong and as powerful and as capable and as competent as I can be, so I can stick it to all the people that have been telling me this other thing. And that manifests itself in a sort of masculinity, which is rooted more into this whole idea of I'm going to be strong and capable so I can be rich, successful, sleep with as many women as I want, have the nice cars, the whole deal. That's masculinity now. And then there's this kind of other way, this third or this path toward what I would call more of a traditional, or for me specifically, more of a biblical masculinity, which is this idea that, yeah, I reject the feminist characterization of masculine traits, and instead I want the ones which say that I am supposed to be strong, competent, capable, but I'm supposed to be that way for a noble purpose. I'm supposed to be that way so I can honor God, so I can protect and provide for my family, so I can defend civilization against those that would attempt to exploit or harm the innocent. And so this is the crisis that I think is going on right now. I think what you're seeing is young men have rejected this idea of toxic masculinity as a category. And now they're trying to search for, okay, what does genuine masculinity really look like? And how does it get me the things that I want? Well, hopefully tempering that with noble and worthwhile goals and aims.
Yeah, that was really, really pretty spot on to what I was kind of thinking. I know we don't have a lot of men on this panel here. We only have Jackson at the moment. So Jackson, if you want to add to anything he said, because I feel like it's obviously more applicable to young men as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, do you think some of the responsibility comes to the parents and how some of these children are being brought up and raised in this new world? And do you believe that's kind of taken a toll on this decline in masculinity among
Oh
this new
yeah, absolutely.
generation?
We have a civilization where parents generally think that their job is to get their children to educate and take care of their children old enough to hand them over to a government school system.
Mhm.
Right. And ultimately the question is, okay, well, what does that young boy get when he goes into a government school system? Does he get it? Does he get a system that is set up to understand masculine traits and then develop them in a healthy way? And I would argue that for a while now, the answer to that question has been no. Now, that's not universally true across every school or every teacher or every program, but I think it is generally true. I don't think that the government run school system has been all that conducive to actually raising up young men in the way that we would want them to be educated and to think about themselves and their role in society and their role toward their families. So I think that's part of it. The other part too is you have an increasing number of young men growing up in single parent households, and typically the single parent household is a mother. So now they have their mother as an influence. And I, again, my parents split up when I was 3. So I spent the summers with my dad, the school years with my mom. So I largely fall into this category of someone that was raised primarily by my mother. Now, thank God I had a father that was still very involved, but I got to see him 4 months out of the year on average, right? So my mom's, obviously a woman, and then most of my teachers are women. And so again, you're growing up in an environment where there's a lot of adult feminine influences, but there's not as many male influences. And when you have a situation where other men can come in and kind of fill that gap, for me it was often my grandfathers, my coaches, and things like that. You can still get positive male role models that can help men develop the sort of capabilities that they need to. But if you don't, well, men seek out other men for leadership. Um, and what you end up happening in a lot of places is they find that maybe within a friend group, they might find it within a gang, they might find it within other sort of, male role model. And if that male role model is not a very good one, well, then the end result is that they go down a very dark track. And so I can't emphasize enough how important it is for parents to reassert their authority and responsibility with respect to raising their kids, both their sons and their daughters. But one thing I like to say when it comes to education is you can delegate authority to other people to educate your children. You cannot delegate responsibility for their education. That will always primarily rest with the parent. And so it's incredibly important that parents are aware of the influences that they allow into their child's life and always make sure that they're playing that kind of preeminent role of guiding them in the way that they need to go.
Yeah, because I mean, I was raised in a two-parent household. My dad was a law enforcement officer for my city, and that was when I was super young. My grandpa went to VMI, and I feel like I grew up in a very masculine family. I mean, from the get-go, I always remember my dad teaching me manners, saying
Mhm.
yes, sir, no, ma'am, saying thank you, yes, please. And I remember whenever I won, he would correct me immediately. And this day and age, I mean, I feel like I'm not seeing a lot of mannerism, and especially going through my campus at school, if I hold the door for someone, they just kind of blow by. And that's
Yeah.
just something that I've seen grow recently, and especially over the past 10 years, I've seen mannerism decline
There, there's
very
this
much so.
there's this graph that they sometimes show where it says that hard men create good times create weak men create hard times, and they work it as kind of this circle, and it's a very abbreviated kind of explanation, but there's some truth to that. There's this element that men are supposed to play a particular role within society, both as individuals, as husbands, as fathers, as grandfathers, etc. And one of the things that ends up happening is when you have this breakdown, when you don't have an older generation of men training up a younger generation of men in the proper application of their male characteristics, you end up getting hard times. For a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's laziness. Sometimes it's a lack of manners. Sometimes it's not being able to protect and provide in a way that's actually necessary. And there's part of this rejection of what we might call traditional gender roles has been rooted in this idea that, well, all of that is old fashioned or it's archaic or it's religious or whatever else. And I think regardless of what sort of justification you use for trying to dismiss it, I think we've seen the results. And I think one of the things that's most telling is liberal women like conservative men. And they're confused by this. You can go see all these little videos on TikTok and whatnot going, where are all the masculine men out? It's like, are you serious? You didn't want them. You told them their masculinity was toxic. You told them it was bad. And now you don't like the sort of guys that you're dating. Why? Well, I don't know. They don't hold the door open. They don't treat you like a lady. They don't pick up the tab. You don't feel safe around them because they couldn't protect themselves, much less you as well. And then all of a sudden, when they're around a man that can do those things and operates in a proper and respectful manner, all of a sudden it's like, wow, where's this guy been? Well, not in the circles you run in because you didn't reward it. And so I think there's an important thing to recognize here. And again, my faith provides a structure to explain all of this, and I think it's played out by practical reality. But I look at my wife. My wife is an incredibly, strong woman. I was going off to combat in Iraq when I was a Green Beret, and my wife was at home having to manage everything with like 2 kids the first tour and 3 kids the second tour, and did it all beautifully, right? She can run everything. On top of that, she can shoot. She can, take care of things. She's the handy one around the house, right? If we needed something built, she would do it. And yet I don't feel threatened by those characteristics, and she doesn't feel threatened by mine. Instead, we look at them as being complementary. And it's amazing how when men and women stop trying to play this game where we fulfill each other's different roles and instead just embrace the various roles that we have. And none of this means that women can't do, stuff within politics or within the work environment or whatnot. And none of it means that men shouldn't be able to do more stuff, within the house. Because a lot of times traditional roles get pigeonholed into this idea of the public sphere versus the private sphere. It's more about just understanding the various God-given traits and then developing those in such a way that are complementary with the people in our lives.
Yeah, I think as a young woman, it's really frustrating to see what the culture of, I guess, toxic masculinity has done to young men like around my age, 20. I grew up with my dad he was in the Army, and then he was in the Marine Corps, and was in the Marine Corps for 20 plus years. My mom is an Army nurse. And I know what it feels like when my dad was away. My mom had to raise me with a full-time job running a hospital, and having to make time to put food on the table. And it's as someone his mother, who was kind of, I like identify her as like a traditional feminist, um she still leaned into her femininity with my dad. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like there is still that balance. And
Well, can I say something on that real quick that's
absolutely,
important?
yeah.
Because I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood on this. There's this idea that, okay, well, traditional roles are woman's at home with the kids in the kitchen, man is off at work, et cetera. And people can choose that arrangement. That's perfectly fine.
Great.
But I don't think that we should confuse an aesthetic
Yeah.
with various roles. So for instance, when you read Proverbs 31, right? They always in Christian circles, they talk about a Proverbs 31 woman. What is that? You read that, that's the most intimidating woman you've ever met in your life, right? Like she's an entrepreneur, she's a fighter, she's an inventor, she's a homemaker, she's a mother, she's a wife, again, she's an incredible model for femininity. And so I don't think we should get pigeonholed. I see this sometimes with like the whole trad wife thing that you
Right.
see as kind
Yeah.
of a trend. And it's almost like they've turned this aesthetic into something of a fetish.
Hmm.
And it's like, I don't think, like, at least from my perspective, that's not what I'm looking for. I think it's more about this idea of a woman embracing feminine traits and feminine attributes
Hmm.
and not seeing them as something that she has to suppress or change out for male ones in order to be a full member of society, but rather addressing all the various ways that her femininity flourishes within the various areas of life, society, family, work, etc. And men should do the same thing. And one of the things that we should just admit up front is that whenever we're talking about characteristics, we recognize that there are some men that might lean into certain characteristics we generally associate with the feminine. There might be some women that lean into certain traits that we generally associate with the masculine. The whole idea is, are they manifesting in a way that is positive? So masculine, we generally associate aggression with masculinity. All right. If I'm aggressive in such a way as I hurt another person, I hurt an old lady to steal her purse, that is a toxic manifestation of a masculine trait. But if I'm aggressive in the sense that I run over there to protect the old woman from the man that's trying to take her purse, that's a positive manifestation of the aggressive trait. And so, really, what this is all about is recognizing that any traits within femininity or masculinity can have a negative manifestation and a positive manifestation. And the goal is not to eliminate the traits. The goal is to recognize the positive and then order ourselves, whether it be our individual personal responsibility as parents, as mentors, whatever it is, to bring out the positive and to reward the positive rather than the negative.
Yeah, and everything you said, I completely agree with, and I wish young women and men my age understood that concept. Because, like I was saying earlier, it is super frustrating when you go on dates with a young man and you try to have things in common with them, and it's all about hookup culture, or it's all about, um, it's not about actual values. It's really about like sex type of stuff. And it's extremely frustrating, especially as someone who is, obviously looking for a long-term commitment relationship that has those values that I saw within my parents, their
Yeah.
relationship. And I think people don't want to accept the fact that in order to find those people, you're looking in the wrong places, like you actually might need to go to church, and
Yeah.
actually, if you want to meet someone with those values, you actually have to go to the right areas. And it's so annoying when you hear people online or on Instagram or in person, friends who come to you and complain like, oh, I met this guy. It's okay. Where'd you meet him? Oh, well, I met him at this bar. Well, that's probably not the best place to find someone,
Yeah.
especially if you're looking for that specific type of man, because they are there, you have to look in the right spots. Um,
Yeah. No, I think that's 100% accurate. Um, I've been married 26 years to my wife. We got married at 19 and 20, right? Like I absolutely love my wife. Met her in high school. We were high school sweethearts. And people now ask me like, well, what's the most important thing to make a relationship work? And I always say, well, the first thing starts with your shared faith, right? Like
Absolutely, yeah.
if you have shared faith, all of a sudden what that means, like, so for instance, if my wife has a problem with something I do, she can point to this outside source, which is an authority over me, which is like scripture. And she can say, hey, babe, I think you screwed this up. And here's the verse which backs me up. And I can be like, oh, yeah, you're right. I'm wrong. I can do the same thing to her. So it's
Right,
mutual, right? There's
right.
an objective standard for right and wrong, which both of us can appeal to. So to the extent that we can't find agreement on something, we both have an agreed upon source that we can go to in order to resolve something, which is incredibly empowering because you're going to have times in marriage that you disagree. And how do you navigate that? I can't imagine how people navigate the difficulties associated with marriage without having something like that.
Mhm.
Because when it's all just vibes or it's feeling or it's physical attraction, and to your point about hookup culture, one of the worst things that you can do, and this, I'm going to sound like a Puritan here, but it's absolutely true. The quicker you get physical in a relationship, the more likely you are to cover up red flags
It's true.
because you're chasing the physical.
Right.
When you actually get to know somebody on a personal level, and by that I don't just mean like intellect and interest. When you get to actually see a little bit about their personality, where they came from, why they have deep feelings about what it might be, when you fall in love with that side of a person, that's a far stronger commitment because the physical stuff is easy. I had no problem being physically attracted to my wife. That was instantaneous. Right. But it was that process of getting to know her on a very deep and personal, intellectual, spiritual, emotional level where I fell in love to the point where it's like, I can't live without this woman.
Mhm.
And the more physical you add on to that, the more you cover up the difficult conversations or the interesting conversations because you just want to get to the sex.
Yeah.
Right. So my whole thing is like, there's a reason why, like, God says, wait till marriage. And it's not because he's trying to delay gratification. It's because you need to make sure that you actually truly love this person and connect with them on that level. And then when you get married, you want to be able to have you want to be able to have that very unique commitment to one another. You don't want to be compared to the 14 people that came before you,
Yeah.
right? She doesn't want that. And so one of the things, not to get in a kind of an awkward area here, but it is one of those things where I think we've done a horrible job in the church explaining to the people, like, we're not telling you not to do this just because it's bad. We're telling you to delay this because within these conditions, it's awesome. And outside of these conditions, you're inviting trouble.
Yeah. And I personally relate to everything you just said. I'm engaged. Actually, I'm 20 years old. I'm engaged, and I get a lot of flack from actually people. I'm Catholic, and so I've
Yeah.
had people in the church. I have a lot of I guess like kickback from people saying like you shouldn't be engaged. You need to go experience life. You need to go. It's like
That's so
no,
stupid.
it's such a dumb thing because my
So
fiance's in the
dumb.
Marine Corps and he's a
Yeah.
pilot and he's got all this stuff kind of together and before me, he was focused on his career and he didn't really
Yeah.
have all these girlfriends and everything. And I found that to be the most attractive thing about him, that I actually, I don't have to worry about, oh, being compared to another woman or being compared to past girlfriends or, oh my gosh, did he, hold my hand the way he held her hand? I
Hmm.
never worried about that. It's always something that's uniquely special between me and him. And it's gotten to the point where, people try to say, oh, you shouldn't get married young or whatever. And at that point, it's just like, you know what? I'm happy in my relationship and we have a very faith-driven relationship and my parents consent of it. So it's not, to me, it's
100 freaking percent. Let me just say this right now. Um, I'm not saying that there's any age that like is you have to get married at, right?
right.
There's no like, you know, however, I got so frustrated with the people that told me, well, Nick, you need to go out and live life a little bit and then settle down. I'm like,
Mhm.
if you think marriage is the settling down part, you've got it completely backwards.
It's true.
I don't want to go out and have a bunch of meaningless experiences because that's what they mean half the time. I don't want to go have a bunch of meaningless experiences with a bunch of randos, right?
Right.
And then find somebody that I'm going to build a life with. No, I want to find her. And not only that, I also don't want to go build a life and then just add her to it like she's an accessory.
Right.
I found a woman I loved and I wanted to build a life with her. And that's what we did. And the end result is that my wife was with me when I was a private in the army, right? She was with me at the very beginning. I was nothing but potential and not a whole lot of that either, right? But we went through all of this together. We built our life together. We had our kids. We went through challenges, we went through combat deployments. We went through moving, we went through being away from family. We had to really like grow into this marriage and figure it out between us and God what our roles are going to be and what we were going to do. And I wouldn't trade any of that. And I don't know a single person, I don't know a single person that went out and lived a bunch of life and then got married that thought, yeah, that was a good idea. Right.
Yeah.
It's such the same people that are screwing up their relationships on a daily basis are then turning back and giving advice, not because they like the situation that they're in, but because it's culturally acceptable to think these ways. Well, that's idiotic, right? Do what works. Don't do what is popular, especially if the popular stuff is screwing everybody up.
Yeah. Elizabeth, you had a point you wanted to mention earlier.
Yeah,
Sorry to
it's
cut
kind
you
of
off.
back to the original question. I think women have been told for so long that you can do everything that a man can do. It sort of it erases how essential it is to have men in our world and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Because as a personal preference, I don't want to be able to do everything a man can do. I think that
Yeah.
would be exhausting trying to fulfill both roles all of the time. And I think men have perspectives that women don't have that are very valuable. I think women have perspectives that men don't have. My professors love talking about like breaking binaries.
Oh yeah, you hear that all the time.
All the
I hate
time.
that. I hate hearing that.
Hate binaries. They love breaking them, but I think we have certain categories for things for a reason. When we try to disrupt certain categories and certain orders, there's nothing but chaos, and it's very confusing. And so I think the idea of masculinity and femininity is very confused
Yeah.
nowadays.
Isn't it incredible how they talk about this stuff as if it's just obvious? Like,
Mhm.
oh, we're breaking binaries.
Right.
Okay, is that a good thing? Well, of course. Why? Why is it a good thing?
Mhm.
Well, because we've said so. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
it's amazing to me that we can, these are just old archaic traditions which have guided human civilization for 8,000 years. But yeah, you're right. This new trendy thing coming out of Cal Berkeley, that's what we should be doing. How's that working out for everyone? Are people are significantly happier with the arrangements that they see right now? I find it fascinating. There was a poll that came out not that long ago, and it was talking about mental health issues,
Mm.
and it was specifically asking young white women if they had ever been diagnosed with a mental health issue.
I
And
feel
for
like that's such a gotcha. I feel like that's such a gotcha. Like when people say, when you go to like people in especially in the school system, push young women to go to, um, like healthcare providers, and
Yeah.
they always say you have anxiety, you have depression.
Yes.
And as I find it's so funny because my dad actually has PTSD and TBI. He was blown up in
Yeah.
Afghanistan. And it's like, if I come to my dad and I were to tell him, Dad, I'm really anxious about school, my dad would be like, go on a run, suck it up. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like, I wish we treated things that way. I wish, instead of just putting a label and, letting big pharma give you some sort of random medication that you don't know what's going to do to your
Oh,
body. We
our, our
actually, I don't know, eat cleaner, work out, get your stress out,
yeah.
just and
Our
stop.
trauma becomes our identity.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then everything becomes trauma, because if you're fighting in this kind of intersectional world where the more victim points I get, the more I'm to be celebrated within society. Well, then, yeah, I turn everything into trauma, and then all of the trauma becomes the identity. But here's what was fascinating in the poll. They asked young white women, have you ever been diagnosed with a mental health issue? And those who identified as conservatives, it was like under 15%.
mm,
Those who identified as moderates, it was like under 20%. Those who identified as liberal, 52%.
of course,
So
yeah,
so let me get this straight. We live in arguably the most feminist, intersectional, bubble wrap the world environment that we've ever lived in. And you're suffering from more mental health issues? And the attitude is, the explanation for it is well, we just diagnose it better now. Okay, again, I'm not saying that when somebody doesn't undergo serious trauma that they shouldn't be able to go out and seek professional help in order to address that.
right,
But there are so many things in life to where we used to, male or female, we used to say, like your dad said, well, hey, go for a run, do this, do
yeah,
that. What that did was, when it's appropriately applied, it builds resilience. It builds a mindset in people. We don't expect the world to be bubble wrapped for us. We don't expect the world to stop every time we have a bad day or we feel a little bit anxious. And then we mature and we develop various characteristics and patterns and traits and disciplines in order to deal with life as we find it. And that is a far more resilient person. And that's almost 99.9% of the time a far happier and more capable person than somebody that is constantly having to relive and unpack their trauma every 5 seconds. Like, I don't see this producing better results. And yet they persist in teaching young people that this is the way to view the world. And the most obvious question I tend up ending, I've gotten to a point where I'm so tired of arguing it on an intellectual level when I feel like the results are so obvious.
mhm.
And it has gotten to a point where every once in a while I will just look and be like, and how's that working out for you?
Yeah, really.
It's-
Oh, gosh, it's so frustrating. I think in a classroom setting, it can be frustrating as well. I mean, you see all these people who have, and rightfully, there are some people who do need accommodations for things. I understand that. But there are like people who abuse because it's there, and professors don't really care about what your excuse is.
yeah.
People abuse this all the time, like all these accommodations, and it's just like, guys, just take the test. Like, you don't need to. I don't know. Maybe I'm just mean.
No, no.
It gets so
Well,
frustrating. It's just like, what the heck?
the problem is too, is that as much as they've tried to take these elements of the university, which are only permitted to exist in the university because it's an artificial environment.
Mhm.
Um, as soon as you take it out into the practical world, we're now all, because let's face it, a professor, how do we grade whether or not a professor does a good job? Right? Is it the number of students that passes class? No. Is it the number of paper he writes? Maybe. Is it the number of research grants he gets? Possibly. Right. But ultimately, once you get outside of an academic institution, where all of a sudden your ability to deal with issues, to deal with challenges, to adapt and overcome in order to produce goods and services, which will get you, a paying job, that's what you're graded on. And you showing up to those sorts of practical environments where real things have to get done, or, everything stops, all of a sudden, like, well, I have this trauma. Okay, well, that sucks, but you're going to have to go deal with that over here because we got real stuff we got to get done. And the universities, again, created this bubble wrapped environment where it's like, oh my gosh, here's a puppy to hold before you take your test because of social anxiety. I'm sorry, that's just not, we can't function as a society in that way because the world has inherent challenges. And it doesn't mean everything's unfair. It just is what it is. And the more you have somebody that helps you actually build resilience, the better you are able to navigate those things and the more confident you feel in being able to navigate those things. So it's amazing that there will be things that I will describe stories like from Iraq, or I will describe stories from other things, and people look at me like, oh my gosh, that was so traumatic. And I'm like, well, I never thought of it that way. Like
Yeah.
it didn't occur to me that that was traumatic. It was an experience that I learned from.
Right.
And I just think it's so much healthier way. This is why cognitive behavioral therapy, I think, is so much more effective than the let's dwell and identify with our trauma.
Right. Elizabeth, you were gonna add
Yeah, I was
something?
gonna say, I think it's interesting that once you're diagnosed, you can't get undiagnosed. So
Mm.
even if you say go to therapy, you do all of this stuff to work through your problems, say you're not feeling anxious or depressed anymore, you can't get undiagnosed. And a lot of people use those labels as excuses.
Well, and it's, I guess I wouldn't mind if, look, I can appreciate different perspectives, and I can also appreciate how the experiences people have shape our worldview. I get all of that. But what it's become, to your point, is that it's not, here's my unique way of thinking about this, or here's what's influenced my way of viewing this. It's because I'm this must be my conclusion.
Yeah.
Or because I have prefaced what I'm about to say with this, you're not allowed to question my analysis or to question my conclusion. And that doesn't make any sense. It's one of the things I can't stand is this idea of, well, your truth and my truth. That's crap. There's the truth, and then we have different perspectives on the truth. And one of the ways you get a better, deeper, richer understanding of the truth is you actually interact with people with different perspectives, and you work through things, and you try to figure out what actually best reflects reality. Because the moment I always ask students this question, the moment someone tells you there's no such thing as objective truth, what's the first question you should ask them? Is that true? Because how are they going to answer? Well, if they say, no, it's not true. Oh, good. Then I don't got to believe what you said, because you just said your statement wasn't true. If they say it is true, well, then they've just contradicted themselves, and they've said the statement that there's no such thing as objective truth is self-defeating. And yet this predominates on college campuses, where students and people have been taught that no, there is no real truth. There's just perspectives. No, there's a true thing. And our perspectives, once shared and once discussed and debated and all these other things, hopefully can help us arrive at a more complete picture of the truth. And again, I think the people that adopt that sort of worldview end up having a lot easier time making sense of reality than the people that think reality should constantly adjust to accommodate them and their traumas or their diagnoses or whatever else. So, yeah, maybe I'm mean.
Maybe we all are.
Yeah.
Kind of just something like that as we were talking about this, and it popped in my head. Honestly, I think it was really COVID that kind of shook all this stuff up, because I remember you see all these like videos of people talking about, man, I wish if it was 2016, or I wish it was 2014. And it's like, yeah, I do wish it was then, because I don't remember having any of these issues.
Everyone was outside.
Everyone was outside. Yeah, everyone
Yeah.
went, kids, that's 2014. I was like a kid. Playing outside, playing with neighborhood friends. It was never a thing. Now it's like kids at the age I was at 14 are asking each other what pronouns are. What's your pronoun? Do you identify as a unicorn? I identify as it. It's like, what is this?
Yeah.
I just think it all stemmed from COVID. I think it was the government, in my opinion, it was a way for them to control how young kids think and how we operate, to control the future of because we're the next generation. And
Mhm.
it's really frustrating. It's just like, what?
I think it's interesting whenever you have a unique, kind of a unique lifetime event like COVID.
Mhm.
It basically provides a unique kind of, almost a petri dish for social engineering.
Right.
So when I look at things like I identify as, or my pronouns, like I can trace all of that back to critical theory, which I can trace back to like Herbert Marcuse and the postmodernist schools and the deconstructionist schools and all of that. And that goes back to the 60s and before. But then you have something like COVID, and you have this massive event where all of a sudden government entities are not only assume certain authorities for themselves, but are generally granted that authority by the public at large due to fear. And then we're all told that certain things are necessary and we must do these things and we must not, and we must do them not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors or grandma or society in general. And it ends up almost being this test to see how far authorities can go, how far experts can go in order to compel people to do things that they would never normally do. And whether it's intentional and nefarious or just a byproduct of uncertainty, it always ends up it always ends up kind of showing us the real status of things on some level. And I think one of the things that COVID did was, first of all, it revealed to a lot of parents what was actually going on in their classrooms. And as time went on, it revealed to us how eager certain people were within politics to use their authority to try to control things,
Yeah.
and what they would say in, for our own good. It also revealed how people and institutions that we used to trust for their expertise and their objective analysis, we ended up finding how subjective a lot of it was. We ended up finding how much of what they were telling us to do was less about what the data actually proved and more about kind of manipulation. This whole thing with Fauci and the masks. You shouldn't do any masks. Oh, okay, we shouldn't do masks. No, no, no. Now you have to do masks. In fact, 2 masks, 3 masks. It's like, what? Okay, why was it that we shouldn't use? Well, the reason why you shouldn't use it before is we didn't want to run out. So I did need it before, but well, actually, it doesn't actually really stop the virus. That's what.
Doesn't, no.
Well, then why are we? And a lot of this almost became this inertia of, if they came back later and said, "Hey, that thing we told you was wrong, but now we're telling you this." Well, now you break trust, but you break even more trust when you're not honest with us. Right? When you tell us that we're not, when you actually deplatform people for questioning whether or not the Wuhan virus came from the Wuhan coronavirus lab, right? Like, that's not a Jon Stewart, who's not a conservative, right? He did the best little skit on this, and on Steve Colbert going, "We're not allowed to ask on whether or not the lab that studies the Wuhan virus might have had something to do with this global pandemic." And that was the thing where I think a couple of things happened. One, you totally interrupted the natural development that kids and children typically go through with interaction and talking to people. You put them in masks, you took them out of their environments. There was a lot of fear mixed into it. There was a lot of uncertainty with what should happen. People lost their jobs. People felt isolated. People lost loved ones and they weren't able to visit them. And then you find out later, wait a second, we didn't need to shut down all the schools. Wait a second, kids didn't need to do this. Wait a second, grandma didn't need to die alone. But you told me they did. You told me we were saving the world. And the end result is that people look back at these institutions now and it's like, I'm never going to trust you again.
Yeah.
And so that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. One, it's dangerous that such people would be given such authority. But two, it's also dangerous because it's not a good thing when people start to lose trust in cultural and intellectually shaping institutions that we used to be able to rely upon. And so it creates this sense of uncertainty and uneasiness on who can I actually trust. And we're now going through this process of reevaluating a lot of that. And even though, we're getting past COVID, new things pop up. Charlie Kirk being murdered was a perfect example of this. Let me put it this way. Charlie Kirk being murdered didn't change everything. The way the left reacted to Charlie Kirk is what changed everything. I know
Absolutely.
for many of us. And so now we're in this place where we went through this massive element of fear and uncertainty and then mistrust. And it's just been exacerbated by elements within our politics. And it hasn't been exacerbated exclusively because of, politicians trying to manipulate things. It's been exacerbated because there's very, very real differences there. And we're starting to find out that a lot of these differences don't peacefully coexist. We're going to have to figure out how to navigate this next phase of American history very, very carefully, to avoid the kind of violence that we've seen.
Yeah. Jackson, do you want to add anything to that?
I mean, taking it back to COVID, I mean, personally, ever since COVID happened, I've definitely seen a rise in so-called social anxiety, especially within our country. And looking back on this too, I want to say it's more so also with the uprise of kind of electronics and stuff like that. I mean, when I was a kid, I remember I didn't have a phone until maybe high school, I would say. And I would be around the neighborhood. I would have my parents have to call the other houses saying, "Hey, can you send them back home for dinner? Come back home." And I mean, I wouldn't want to come back home. And it was a lot of face-to-face interaction back when I was younger. And now, so, I mean, I have a younger brother who just started his freshman year in high school, and I think he got a phone in middle school. And I don't see so much of them interacting face to face. They're saying, "Hey, let's play this video game
Yeah.
together. Let's go online together." There's a lot of online interaction nowadays instead of that face to face. And I feel like that's kind of led to a lot of social anxiety within our generation, especially. And people are afraid to talk to people in person. And when I go up to people and talk to people during class or anything like that, I mean, people seem super nervous. And public speaking is definitely gone down a lot. I mean, people
Mhm.
have anxiety talking in public, talking to
Yeah.
people they've never met before.
No, you're absolutely right. I think Jonathan Haidt has probably done the best work I have seen on this with kind of illustrating how social media, access to the internet, cameras and screens everywhere has drastically altered the way that young people develop social skills. And Jonathan Haidt has gone so far as to say, like, your kids do not need social media until they're 18. Like,
Yeah.
he's gone on to say that when it comes to like phones, smartphones, they probably shouldn't have that until at least 16. And that almost seems draconian to people now. He did make a distinction a while back that I thought was important when he was talking about screen time.
Hmm.
And he said there's a big difference between screen time in the way of like family movie night versus going through and scrolling on your phone and getting kind of instant gratification or dopamine hits through that interaction. And that's what he said was problematic, is that we've gotten to a point where this ends up being like an addiction, like a very, very real addiction, where if your 3-year-old is sitting there like on their iPad scrolling through and playing games and doing all this interaction, and then you take it away and you see the absolute meltdown that happens as a result of that, it's because their brain is going through this developmental process. And you're now training their brain in a particular way that is going to be incredibly hard to correct later on. It is both great and kind of terrifying news that we know so much more about early brain development and how those initial interactions when your child is 1, 2, 3, how absolutely critical they are for development going forward. And when we interrupt that with the internet, when we interrupt that with the kind of screen time that Jonathan Haidt's worried about, it can have disastrous effects. Not to mention the fact that there's a certain degree of carefreeness that you should be able to experience as a child. I was of that generation where we didn't really have the internet growing up, and I mean it was there, and we had some games and stuff like that. And I remember getting a Super Nintendo and Street Fighter 2, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is cool. I don't got to walk down to the 7-Eleven and play it anymore. Um, but nothing like it is today. And then so I'm old enough to where I still got that experience of living without constant phones and constant internet and constant media. But I'm young enough to where when it came on the scene, I wasn't afraid of it. I thought it was cool, right? It was
Mhm.
like, oh, I want to learn how to do this. We're getting into a point right now where, look, there's certain bells you can't really unring. And so the question is going to have to be, for parents going forward, you're really going to have to make a very positive effort at limiting access to certain things. And what that's going to end up meaning is, if you're sending your kids into an educational environment very young, you might have set up all the appropriate rules for your kids with respect to having phones or screen time or access to the internet. But once they go into a different environment where now they're around a whole bunch of other people that have very, very different rules or very, very different access, pornography has become a huge problem. I mean, we have 7-year-olds addicted to pornography. And what that ends up breeding later on with respect to the ability to have a relationship or even violent tendencies is catastrophic. And so one of the things I know I encourage parents now is like, look, your job is not to go along with whatever the culture says. Your job is to do what's best for your kids. And that doesn't mean isolating them, but it does mean putting in appropriate safeguards to make sure that your kids can develop the sort of, social interaction, social skills, and discernment that they need to, so that as they get older and they do have more access to things, they know how to wisely and appropriately use them within the proper contexts. But you're absolutely right that there is no question. Again, I encourage everybody to take a look at some of the work that Jonathan Haidt has done on this, because I think it's, again, I serve on the Communications Technology and Innovation Committee, and we've tried to cover down on some of this, and it's difficult to write legislation for. right? Because it's not like we want to ban access to resources, but by the same token, how do we put in those appropriate guidelines? And what we found out is that there are certain things that we can do legislatively, but there is just no substitute for a parent establishing boundaries and developing that relationship in such a way. One of the things I did for my kids is when they came of an age where they could drive and they got a phone, I remember telling my kids, I said, I'm letting you use this phone. This is not your phone. This is my phone. I'm letting you use it. So you have access to something now. If I ask to see it, I'm not going to hear any complaints about how I'm invading your privacy because it isn't yours. It's mine. Are we clear? Yes, we're clear, Dad. Not a problem. That actually staved off a lot of problems because one, if they know I can check their phone anytime, right? Like, oh, you might want to be careful. But then it was also about waiting till an age where it was appropriate because as the saying goes, when you give your kids a smartphone, you don't just give them access to the world, you give the world access to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, same thing happened to me. I mean, when my dad gave me a phone, he made it clear that it was his phone. And same thing happened to when I was gifted a car, it's my car.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
give you the keys when you're allowed to drive. And
Yeah.
going back to kind of state legislature I mean, I've seen Virginia schools, especially recently, have started banning phones in the classroom and they
Yeah.
have to hand them off when they enter classrooms. I mean, it's more so I went to a private school, but it's more so for public schools. But I know my school back home that I used to go to is they're making everyone put their phones away during the class time and everything like that. And especially when I was in high school, there would be people on their phones in class, and it's just becoming an addiction. And a lot of parents especially kids, are a little bit outraged by this cell phone ban during school hours. But
Yeah.
I mean, what's your take on that?
I'm gonna say right now, and I don't mean this flippant, it's just honest. I don't care if kids are outraged.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm not saying that because I don't care about kids. I'm saying it because they're not adults, right? They're kids are going to make a whole variety of decisions that they shouldn't make based off of what they want or what they desire rather than what is best for them. That's the reason why we have, that's the reason why we have different rules for adults and children within society. And so it's not that I never took into account my kids' input or desires. It was more that I always measured it against what I thought was best. And my word was going to be the one that won out at the end of the day. When it comes to the legislative side with schools, I really struggled with this because I totally understood the relevancy of and the importance of restricting access to phones in the classroom. I also saw situations where students were able to actually record things that teachers were doing that they should not have been doing with their phones. So that was a concern. There's also obviously medical concerns and things like that if somebody has to have access to a phone for a variety of reasons. So the conclusion I came to was, look, I don't know that we should mandate a policy at the state level. But I do think that local school districts should have all of the authority necessary in order to determine whether or not they're going to permit smartphones on campus or in the classroom. And one of the things and here's the other thing we need to understand. So if you've never read Thomas Sowell, start because Thomas Sowell is brilliant. But he has this thing that he repeatedly says all the time. And he goes, politicians often talk about solutions when in reality, all they're doing is engaging in trade-offs. Right. So a solution presumes that whatever we've done has fixed the problem with minimal consequences, when in reality, trade-offs are what's more likely to happen. Right. There's going to be pros and cons, and good policy is generally something for which the pros massively outweigh the cons. And there will be cons with restricting access to cell phones with students in a school setting. But more and more, it's looking like the benefits are overwhelming. You have teachers talking about for the first time, since the policy went into place, my students were actually paying attention, making eye contact, and taking notes. And they were actually interacting with the subject matter in a way that they didn't before when there was always a distraction. And even when the phone was in the backpack, there was still this idea of proximity. So when the phone was completely taken out of the equation, it was left at home, or it was put in, whatever, one of those boxes or whatnot at the beginning of the school day, there was a drastic difference with respect to student interaction. And so I think there are things that we can look at legislatively for that. And again, this comes from someone that's skeptical of the government running education in the first place.
Yeah.
But to the extent that we're going to be involved, I think certain things like that are certainly worthy of discussion within the public policy realm.
I mean, my parents had us use a track phone for
Yeah.
emergencies, like where you had to like buy
My
the
parents
minutes
still
and
track my
everything.
Oh yeah, the burner
Yeah,
phones.
it was like one of the, like the
Oh, burner phone.
like
Oh,
the
I had a
flip
flip phone.
phones.
Okay, I don't know why I was
like
like,
you can't do much on that other than like, play Uno or something.
you know what? Uno slapped though. I
It
have to
did.
say, Uno was fun.
It did. I
I
had a
liked
great time
Uno.
playing Uno on the track.
Did you have
Yeah.
mine was magenta and it slid out. The keyboard slid out.
Yeah, ours was yellow.
It was yellow. See, that's cool. That's cool. I wish I had a yellow phone.
See, look at this. Like, I guarantee all of you went to school with kids that thought your parents were a bunch of draconian tyrants that wouldn't give you
It's true.
access to and here you are hosting a podcast, talking about things. You all got back from athletic events earlier. You're in university. You're pursuing your goals. You have no problem talking and interacting with people. And yeah, there would have been a point growing up where you would have had a bunch of friends saying your parents suck. But
Yeah.
in reality, they understood what was going to be better for you in the long run and made those necessary decisions and set an example for you. Because the other thing I notice about all of you is you speak well of your parents. And this is something too that I think is so critical. And it's something that I talk to dads a lot about. I do a lot of videos on raising, I have a son and two daughters, and I talk a lot about being a girl dad, being a boy dad. And one of the things that I always emphasize to them is that relationship that you build with them starts when they're infants. It doesn't start when they're, teenagers. If you start investing in your relationship with your daughter when she becomes 13, I got really bad news for you, Dad. Right? But when you establish it early on, and again, this is coming from someone that had to be gone a lot.
Yeah.
I missed almost the entire first year of my youngest daughter's life. Right? When you invest in those relationships with your kids, what ends up happening is when you have to tell them no, they automatically assume it comes from a place of protecting them. And so even if they might not like it in the moment, there's a default position that mom and dad wouldn't do this unless there was a good reason.
Mhm.
And then later on, when you discover when you more fully discover what the reason is, or maybe they explained it to you, but now you appreciate the explanation that they provided, there's a level of trust there. And what that ends up doing is that it not only benefits you, but that method that they used is now conveyed to you in something you choose to do in your own children's life. And that's how you get generation after generation of well-adjusted adults.
Yeah, because I mean, I feel like a lot of parents are scared or nervous to tell their kids no nowadays. I mean, a lot of kids kind of have this free reign to
Yeah.
do whatever they want, and parents are kind of like, all right, go ahead, do whatever you feel like doing.
Like,
Well, and what's crazy about this, I had somebody ask me once, like, we told our kids no dating until you're 18. They're like, oh my gosh, that's horrendous. I'm like, well, no, our rule was, why would you date before you're ready to get married? I want you to have respect for your body and your heart. I want you to respect have other people's body and hearts. And so you can be friends, you can do all this other stuff, but we're going to now, did I fudge on that a little bit? Yeah. When my daughter was 17 and she had a boy that she really liked and we knew him very well and they wanted to start dating, I allowed him to do it. Why? Because she showed the proper mindset and emotional maturity. And I trust my daughter. But those rules were set up. And I remember a parent telling me, it's like, well, was that a rule when you were growing up? I said, no. They're like, wasn't that hypocritical? First of all, no. And second of all, who cares?
Yeah.
My job is not to recreate the experience I had as a child. My job is to do the best job possible to raise my children up in the way that they should go, to protect them, and to allow them to engage in age appropriate risk. Right. So it's not, again, I don't shelter my kids. They were allowed to, take certain age appropriate risks. But when it came to stuff that could do long term damage, well, then, yeah, I'm going to be extra protective of that because that's my job.
right.
And what I found is that I have a great relationship with all three of my kids. My oldest daughter is married. My oldest daughter is 22. She's married. My youngest daughter is 17. She'll probably be married in 2 years. Right. And then my son desperately wants to be married. He's in the military right now. But each one of them, none of my kids fought back on these policies. And I would argue it was because we explained why. We set in the boundaries, we explained why the boundaries existed. And then we were reasonable with them, right? Again, when my daughter came to me and said, would it be okay for me to, date Adam? Like, you have displayed the correct intellectual and emotional and spiritual maturity necessary to actually enter into a relationship now that could potentially lead in marriage. Yes.
And something that, thinking of relationships in high school, I wanted to bring up, I feel like I remember when I was in high school, I never dated anybody in high school. I just had no interest. And I would be shamed for that by other women. Other girls would tell me, I would get, I guess, they would hate on me, I guess is the right word I'm trying to look for, because I didn't want to be in a relationship because
Yeah.
I, one, knew I wasn't emotionally mature enough to, and two, because I enjoyed my family and I enjoyed sports and I enjoyed school and I just, it's just one of those things where I was like, I don't really want to. And my parents growing up never really put a limit on me.
Mhm.
They never dating what didn't really come up. My parents just kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just my personal relationship. I'm an only child, so maybe that's why. But my parents kind of just trusted me with stuff. And I actually when I got to college before I met my fiance, my mom would always tell me, she's like, aren't you gonna go on dates with anybody? Like, do you have any interest? And I'm like, no, not really.
Yeah.
So those type of conversations I remember having. And I remember in high school as well, because we talked about like single parents and whatnot. I
Mhm.
remember kids would get like they would my friends at the time would vent to me about issues with their parents, or say my dad's never here, my mom's never here, and they never try to make it work. And I it was confusing to me because I didn't have my dad for 8 years of my life because my
Mhm.
dad was in Afghanistan. He was fighting, and my mom always made sure almost every night that we would do some sort of Skype call with my dad.
Yep.
She always made him present in my life. And
Great mom.
yeah, my mom is, I want to be my mom. My mom
Yeah.
is great. Um, Incredible woman. And I wouldn't understand it. And I think it was just really upsetting to me. Like those daughters at the time, because I had female friends, didn't want to have, like, it goes both ways. They didn't want to have that relationship with their father. They didn't want to, they didn't want that at all. They were more focused on, getting a, I don't know, they were more focused on other people kind of giving them that, what's the word I'm looking for?
Kind of
I have it in
attention
my
or,
head. Validation, yeah.
oh yeah.
Like people would give them validation and attention for not having a father figure, or not, they
Yes.
liked it. Like they almost liked being vilified. It was like, what?
Th- this
It was
is
weird.
this is one of the this is one of the most dangerous byproducts that doesn't get spoken to enough. But once you start to use trauma as a primary method for social currency, so whether it's, again, mental illness or something like that, once that becomes the social currency, you seek it.
Hmm.
So it's not popular to say, I have a great relationship with my parents,
Right.
right? Because that doesn't convey any trauma points. Right. It's not popular to say, oh, no, no, I love how I grew up. Right. Like that. No, no,
Right.
no. You need bad things. You need bad things to happen so you can garner sympathy and social currency. And then you can raise up the intersectional hierarchy. And, the more trauma, the better. The more discomfort, the better. And people start. And then when the supply of the trauma can't keep up with the demand, well, we just create traumas. And we need to get back to this idea. Like, I hate it when men talk smack about their wife. Like
Yeah.
I want, and I don't like it when women talk smack about their husbands. Like if you're in front of me and you're talking about your spouse that way, and I'm not talking about like playful banter or
Yeah.
joking,
Yeah.
right? But if you're talking about your spouse that way in front of me, it's like, dude, you don't know me, because I don't think any of this is cool. I just think you're a jackass,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm gonna talk well about my wife. That doesn't mean wife and I don't have disagreements, but those are our disagreements. It's none of your business, right? That's my lady, right?
Right. Yeah.
And she talks well about me. And the same experience when I was overseas, my wife never complained about me being gone in front of my kids. I know it was hard for her, but she would have the kids write me letters. She would make them like shirts with my face on it. Whenever we could get on a satellite phone or call or email, she would do it. And she would always tell the kids, like, Daddy is overseas and he's fighting and he's protecting us. And our job is to work here at home to make, do things here. And so our kids didn't feel like they were deprived, or that daddy didn't care, or that I was making things difficult. Instead, it was, this is a difficult challenge that our family has a responsibility to navigate and go through. And this is a part of our service to our family, to God, to our country. So the mindset was completely different. And again, I think we need to get back to this idea of elevating the positive, and being like, no, no, I love my parents, or I love my wife, or I hate it when parents say, oh, I can't wait for the school year to start, get these kids out of the house. I'm like, really? That must suck, because I
Yeah.
like being around my kids, and so I think we need to get back into this unapologetically uplifting the good and the virtuous and the noble, and celebrating that instead of all this other crap. Because I've noticed that people that do that, they're not unhappy all the time.
Do you guys have anything to add to that?
I do have a quick question. What is your take or opinion on the phrase that like strict parents create sneaky kids?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, I don't think I don't think strict parents create sneaky kids. I think authoritarian parents create
Yeah,
sneaky
Mm-hmm.
kids. I think
For sure.
tyrants create sneaky kids. Here's what I like to tell people. Poorly explained or poorly reasoned rules invite rebellion. So if I tell you not to do something just because, if it's arbitrary, it invites rebellion. But if I explain it and I help you go through the process of understanding why something is a particular way, you can now adopt it as sound reasoning. And so what I try to do with my kids and what I always advise other people when they're asking me is that there are times where you may have to say because I say so. I can't explain the physics of running into the middle of the street to my 3-year-old. They just need to know they're going to get in trouble if they do. But the moment my kids start to understand things, I'm taking the time to explain it to them because I want them to understand that they're not just following my rules because I'm some sort of arbitrary authority figure. They're following the rules that I'm conveying to them because it's better for them and because I have more experience and wisdom in this particular field. And so that's what I think it is. I don't think it's strict parents create that. I think it's again, arbitrary rules invite rebellion.
we have. Oh, I just got told we have 1 minute.
Yeah.
So I do want to have one quick favor for you because I watch your stuff all the time. I was introduced to you by a family friend. His name's Kevin Ivy. He asked me to have you like shout him out. So just say, "Hey, Kevin," or something.
Hey, Kevin, how you doing? They all told me that you wanted to be here today, but you were busy getting a manicure, so couldn't
Yeah.
make it. But other than
Actually,
that, you
he's in
sound
Ukraine. I don't know why he decided to go to Ukraine. I'm not even joking. He's
Here I
in
am.
Lviv.
Here I am making fun of the guy, and he's going off to a war zone.
I know. That's that when he left, we were all telling him like, why the heck? Because he just got a hip replacement too, and we
Oh my
said, why
gosh.
the heck do you want to go to Ukraine? That's the most craziest thing. You realize
Yeah.
it's like they have drone strikes. And he's like, I got to get off the couch. I'm like, all right, Kevin.
Bold move, Kev.
Well,
But
move,
hope you're
Kev.
okay, brother.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and I think we had a really good conversation.
Yeah.
My
Uh,
pleasure. Anytime.
and if you want to real quick like shout out your YouTube so
Oh,
people
sure. Well, we made it easy. If you just go to Nick J. Freitas, you can pretty much find me on every social media platform out there. We also have a podcast called Making the Argument as well.
right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.